you believe you comprehend duration. You check your wristwatch. You sense yourself aging. You recall yesterday and you schedule tomorrow. Duration seems straightforward. It seems like the most obvious thing in existence. But that's not duration. That's merely a perception, a biological illusion your mind creates for you. Most individuals walk around with this romantic notion in their minds that duration is a stream. You visualize it flowing, carrying you along from what was, through what is, and into what will be. You believe it advances. But here's the issue with that lovely metaphor. If duration is a stream, how rapidly does the stream flow? 1 second per second. That's circular logic. That's like claiming a chair is 1 chair tall. It reveals absolutely nothing about the fabric of reality. The reality is much stranger, much more systematic, and honestly far less poetic than a flowing current. Duration doesn't flow. Duration doesn't propel you anywhere. And if you believe you have a solid understanding on how duration works just because you can tally seconds in your mind, you're in for a very shocking revelation. Let's begin with what occurs inside your mind, because that's where the misunderstanding starts. You believe your internal timekeeper is a dependable instrument. It isn't. It's a disorganized mess of interpretation methods. Consider a basic experiment. Try to tally to 60 seconds in your mind. Just sit there and count 1, 2, 3. You believe you're monitoring duration, but what you're actually doing is executing a very particular, very individual program. Some of you, when you tally, you perceive a sound in your mind. You're literally conversing to yourself, internally vocalizing 1, 2, 3. If someone disturbs you and requests you to speak, you lose your tally. The system fails. But others, and this is where it becomes intriguing, don't perceive a sound at all. They observe visuals. They might observe a measuring tape with digits on it, advancing past like a ticker display. Click, click, click. If you employ that visual measuring tape method, you can actually browse a newspaper or examine a shopping list while you tally duration. You can organize your footwear, examine patterns in the fabric, and still maintain that mental measuring tape advancing perfectly. But the individual who tallies with a sound, they can't browse a word without losing track of the duration. This reveals us something crucial. What you perceive as the progression of duration is just a mental fabrication, a pattern recognition game your mind executes. It differs dramatically from individual to individual. It is not a cosmic constant. It's a biological mirage. So when we discuss physics, when we discuss the cosmos, we have to discard your mind out the window. We have to cease talking about how it perceives and begin talking about what it genuinely is. That in physics, we have to be practical. That means we don't inquire what is the essence of duration, because that's a question for thinkers who enjoy debating over beverages. We inquire, how do we quantify it? And the response is almost disappointingly basic. Duration is just a method of sequencing occurrences. That's it. It's a cataloging mechanism. Visualize you have a deck of playing cards. You arrange them out in a sequence. You can state the jack is before the queen and the king is after the queen. The cards aren't advancing. The surface isn't flowing. The sequence is just a structural characteristic of how the cards are positioned. Duration is the surface. Occurrences are the cards. When we state duration passes, we're just reading the cards from left to right. This brings us to the biggest error everyone commits. You believe duration is a vessel. You visualize the cosmos as a big, vacant container, and duration is a timepiece on the wall of that container ticking away. Even if the container is vacant, you believe that if we eliminated all the stars, all the worlds, all the particles, and all the radiation, duration would keep ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Incorrect. This is the classical view, and it's obsolete. Duration is not a background platform. Duration is a quantification of transformation. If absolutely nothing in the cosmos transforms, no particles vibrate, no radiation advances, no power shifts, then duration halts. It ceases to have significance. You cannot establish a second without a physical mechanism to designate it. An oscillating pendulum, a vibrating crystal, a cesium particle oscillating. Duration is not separate from the material in the cosmos. Duration is a characteristic of the material. This is where your gut feeling resists. You state, okay, but surely duration acts on things. Duration makes me get older. Duration causes the dairy to spoil. No, it doesn't. This is a linguistic snare. Duration is not an agent. Duration doesn't have appendages. It doesn't reach into the refrigerator and sour your dairy. Microorganisms do that. Chemical processes do that. Disorder does that. Roration is just the record-keeping mechanism we employ to monitor the velocity at which those processes occur. Stating duration did it is like stating centimeters constructed the building. Centimeters didn't construct anything. Builders did. Centimeters just indicate you where the walls are. Duration is the measurement tool, not the laborer. Let's push this measurement tool comparison further, because this is where things get really bizarre. If duration is just a measurement tool we employ to quantify the distance between occurrences, what occurs if the measurement tool itself is malleable? This isn't fantasy literature. This is quantifiable reality. We used to believe that a second was a second anywhere in the cosmos. If you had a timepiece on our planet and a timepiece on the red planet, they would tick-tock in perfect synchronization. It perceives obvious. It perceives correct, and it's completely incorrect. The velocity at which timepieces tick depends on where they are and how rapidly they're advancing. This is not a mechanical breakdown of the timepiece. It is a fundamental characteristic of reality. Visualize you're operating a vehicle across a giant flat sheet of material. You can operate north or you can operate east. If you operate purely north, you're making maximum advancement in the northward direction. But if you rotate the steering mechanism and begin operating northeast, you're distributing your velocity. You're advancing a bit north and a bit east. You aren't going north as rapidly as you were before because you redirected some of that advancement to the east. Now replace north with duration and east with location. This is the essence of modern physics. You are always advancing through the cosmos at a constant velocity. But that advancement is distributed between location and duration. If you sit perfectly motionless in your seat, you're dedicating all your advancement to advancing through duration. You're traveling into the future at maximum velocity, 1 second per second. But the moment you stand up and stroll or get in a spacecraft and soar, you're redirecting some of that advancement into location. You're advancing through location, which means you must mathematically advance slower through duration. Your timepiece slows down. Your aging slows down. You aren't breaking the system. You're just changing direction on the chart. If you could advance at the velocity of radiation, which is the maximum velocity boundary of the cosmos, you would be using 100% of your advancement for location. You would have zero advancement left for duration. For a particle of radiation, duration does not pass. It is created and absorbed in the same instant from its own viewpoint. The cosmos is suspended. Now you might be considering, well, I don't perceive my watch slowing down when I sprint for the transport. Of course not. You're too sluggish. You're a biological creature. The impacts are tiny at human velocities, but they're genuine. We have to program orbital devices with this mathematics. Orbital devices are advancing rapidly, so their duration is different from your duration. We literally have to adjust their timepieces. If we didn't, your positioning system would be incorrect by distances within a day. There's another aspect of duration that deceives us, and it comes back to that tallying problem. The idea of pattern identification. We perceive duration as having a direction, an arrow. What was is fixed, what will be is open. You can recall morning meal, but you can't recall evening meal. Why? If physics formulas work forwards and backwards, and most of them do, why can't we recall the future? If you record a world orbiting a star and play it backward, it looks perfectly fine. It obeys all the principles of attraction. But if you record an egg descending on the floor and breaking and then play it backward, everyone knows it's fabricated. The yellow center doesn't leap off the floor, assemble itself into a sphere, and seal itself inside a shell. Here's the secret. This isn't about duration itself. It's about probability. It's about chaos. It is much, much easier to break an egg than to construct one. There are a billion ways for an egg to be broken. Scattered here, splattered there, shell in 3 fragments, shell in 1,000 fragments. But there is only one specific arrangement where the egg is whole. So as things advance and interact, they naturally stumble from the organized state, few options, to the disorganized state, many options. We call this disorder. And this is the only reason you perceive an arrow of duration. You're watching the cosmos shuffle the deck of playing cards. You started with a perfectly ordered deck, and every second that ticks by is just the cosmos shuffling it a bit more. You can't unshuffle the deck just by wishing. This means that your perception of duration flowing is actually just your mind registering the increase of chaos in the cosmos. You're a chaos detector. When you distinguish what was from what will be, you're really just distinguishing less chaotic from more chaotic. If the cosmos were in a state of maximum chaos, maximum disorder, where everything was evenly distributed out and nothing interesting was occurring, your mind wouldn't be able to distinguish what was from what will be. There would be no egg to break. There would be no memory to form in a thermal equilibrium cosmos. The arrow of duration vanishes. So let's go back to those individuals tallying in their minds. The ones observing the measuring tape versus the ones perceiving the sound. They're both struggling to impose a rigid linear structure on a cosmos that is actually much more malleable. We construct these mental frameworks, these tallying systems, because we need to survive. We need to know when the predator is coming or when the harvest is ready. We evolved to monitor intervals, but we did not evolve to comprehend the dimension of duration. Our minds are efficient, not accurate. We focus on the present because that's where we exist. But in physics, present is a very slippery concept. If you and I are standing next to each other, our present is effectively the same. But if you're on a world a million light years away and you begin walking away from me, your definition of present slices through the cosmos at a different angle than mine. What you consider to be occurring right now might be in my future. What I consider right now might be in your, what was. There is no cosmic present that covers the whole cosmos like a blanket. The cosmos is a block of occurrences, a four-dimensional loaf of bread, and how you slice that loaf depends on how rapidly you're advancing. This is hard to comprehend. It perceives incorrect. It perceives like I'm telling you that up is down. But that's because you're trying to translate the high-level language of the cosmos into the low-level language of your biology. You're trying to tally footwear when you should be quantifying radiation beams. When you try to force the cosmos to fit your gut feeling, you get confusion. You get contradictions. But when you let go of what you believe duration is, when you cease trying to tally it like a pile of laundry and begin quantifying it like a dimension of location, suddenly the formulas work. Suddenly the cosmos makes sense. We're not done because even if we accept that duration is a dimension and that it stretches and squashes with velocity, there's a much deeper question lurking at the bottom of the well. We talked about quantifying duration, and we talked about the arrow of chaos, but we haven't talked about the beginning. If duration is a quantification of transformation, what occurs when you run the recording backward all the way to the first frame? If the cosmos is expanding and we wind it back, it gets smaller and smaller, hotter and hotter. Eventually, you hit a point where the principles of physics themselves begin to melt. You see, all our timepieces, our particles, our worlds, our radiation beams, they exist inside the cosmos. But if the cosmos itself was created in a moment we call the cosmic birth, does it make sense to inquire what occurred before that? This is the ultimate test of your new definition of duration. If duration is just a method of sequencing occurrences inside the cosmos, then inquiring what occurred before the cosmos might be as nonsensical as inquiring what is north of the North Pole. It sounds like a valid question grammatically, but geometrically it's gibberish. There is no north of the North Pole. There may be no duration before duration began. And yet, we still have that nagging perception, that internal tallier, that sound tallying 1, 2, 3. We desperately want the cosmos to have a backstory. We want a timeline that stretches back forever. It's hard to accept that the measuring tape might just begin, that the tallying system had an activation switch. This creates a friction between our psychology and our cosmology. We are finite beings trying to comprehend the infinite using tools made of organic matter and electricity. It's a wonder we comprehend anything at all. Consider the patterns again. The individual who observes the measuring tape in their mind can tally while browsing because they're employing different circuits. Visual versus verbal. Physics is the same. Classical mechanics was the verbal tallying. It worked for day-to-day material. Modern physics is the visual measuring tape. It allows us to process complex patterns that the old method couldn't handle. We're constantly upgrading our mental software to match the hardware of reality, and the upgrade process is painful. It requires discarding concepts we cherish, like the stream of duration. But here's the beautiful part. Even though your gut feeling is incorrect, even though your internal timepiece is a biological hack, and even though duration is a malleable, relative, bendy dimension rather than a strict metronome, it still works for you. You can still boil an egg. You can still meet a companion for beverages at 2 p.m. The bizarreness of modern physics is hidden under the hood. You don't need to comprehend the combustion engine to operate the vehicle, and you don't need to comprehend location, duration, metrics to exist your existence. But isn't it better to know? Isn't it better to know that the engine is there? This brings us back to that strange experiment with the tallying. Remember the difference between the individual who perceives digits and the individual who observes them. This is not just a party trick. It reveals a terrifying gap in how we comprehend the cosmos. When two individuals talk to each other about something complex like duration or modern physics or affection, they believe they're speaking the same language. They acknowledge. They agree. They state, I comprehend. But what's really occurring? You're executing a massive invisible translation scheme. You take the words I state and convert them into your private internal imagery, which might be completely different from mine. I state 1 minute and I observe a timepiece face. You perceive a sound stating 60 seconds. We arrive at the same response. So we believe we agree, but the machinery inside is totally alien. This matters for physics because it exposes the fragility of common sense. Common sense is just the collection of prejudices you acquired by age 18. It's constructed on your specific internal imagery. If your mental image of duration is a tape with digits on it, you'll struggle to comprehend how duration can bend. If your mental image is a sound tallying, you'll struggle to comprehend how duration can be spatial. When we try to teach you about the quantum vacuum, or the curvature of location duration, we aren't just giving you new facts. We're requesting you to delete your operating system. We're requesting you to throw away the measuring tape and silence the sound. And that's why it perceives so hard. That's why your mind rejects it. You aren't just learning. You're translating against the grain of your own biology.